Look at all that fake love for personal safety. I appreciate the enthusiasm. All right. We are a Coast Guard certified vessel. We have life jackets for each and every one of you and specially marked lockers throughout the boat. In the unlikely event of a water landing, please follow the directions of the captain, the crew, the guy talking the loudest. That'll be me. I've got the only working microphone on the boat. We don't know why, but there it is. Please no running. You're on a boat, especially if you're from Utah. No running, even though you may not be into sports. We'll just let that one go. And please no smoking. That includes all those e-cigarettes, whatever they are. There's so many things I can't keep track of them. Just please don't smoke. And we do have a man overboard ladder and a man overboard life ring, but I will save women and children on request and a $5 surcharge. Now let's get to know the two themes that I like to weave in and out of my harbor tour. They're pretty easy to follow. The first one, Boston's lack of creativity when it came to naming things. You look off to the right and you'll see Long Wharf. Need I say any more? We have a tendency to default to the obvious. Long Wharf was the longest and the oldest continuously used wharf in the nation. It was built back in 1710. When it was built, it was almost half a mile long. Now, you look at Long Wharf today and you say, David, what are you on? I'll have what you're having. That's a couple hundred yards at best. Yes, it is. And that leads me to my second theme, which is the amount of man-made land there is around the city of Boston. This will be the most extraordinary thing you learn on this entire tour, other than all the history that's coming your way. Boston was founded on the Shawmut Peninsula, a peninsula by definition, a little spit of land sticking out into a massive body of water. Well, it didn't have a whole lot of waterfront, and if you're going to spend your life fishing and building ships because the peninsula is so rocky and hilly and not good for farming, then you need more actual land. So if you look around the boat at this point, look off every side of the boat at this point in time, doesn't matter which way you look in, there is no original land in sight. I'm going to say that again. There is no original land in sight at this point in time. We are looking at man-made land. 75% of Boston sits on man-made land. So I'm going to keep coming back to that as a theme. It's really incredible. Right now, let's get to some history. Off to the right, through those massive little sailboats, you see a rusty iron bridge conveniently stuck in the broken position. No, I didn't break it. And through that opening, you'll find Griffin's Wharf, the very site of the Boston Tea Party, where on the night of December 16th, 1773, the colonists came down, they boarded 3 Nantucket merchant ships, and they dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into Boston Harbor, all the while proclaiming no taxation without representation. You are all free to stay on the boat. So, 92,000 pounds of tea went overboard. They turned Boston Harbor into the world's largest teapot, proving once and for all that we here in Boston do not know how to make a decent cup of tea. Anyone visiting from the UK to corroborate this? Have you had a decent cup of? Oh, he's already shaking his head before I even finish the question. We don't know how to make tea here in Boston. Apparently you're not supposed to mix it with cold, salty water. Is that right? Yeah? Yeah, we don't have it. That's why we drink coffee. We are a coffee town. So the Boston Tea Party, one of the many sparks of the American Revolution. Now let's stick with the bridge over there. Everything to the right of that bridge is Boston. Everything to the left of the bridge, and soon to be on our starboard side, is South Boston, or Southie if you live here, or seen any movie filmed in Boston. Southie, think the Departed. Now South Boston, if you were here a couple hundred years ago, you would know this as South Bay. The South Boston simply wasn't here. None of this land over here on the right was actually here back in the early 1800s. So South Boston is all man-made land. And to give you a sense of how new these buildings are here, this is what we call the innovation district. These glass buildings over on the right now. Give you a sense of how new they are. Take a look up ahead and see an interesting building. It's 4 stories high. It's got an overhanging 4th floor. This is the ICA, which stands for the Institute of Contemporary Art. I don't know what kind of art you'll find inside the building. It's very useful. That building was built here on the waterfront back in 2006. And up until 2013, just 10 years ago, that was the tallest building in this entire area. That is how new these buildings are here. And I'm going to come back a little bit later and tell you why these buildings got built. But just to show you how influential our narrator is over the architecture of some of these buildings, get your cameras out. You're going to get a great selfie here. I asked them to angle this building down a little bit towards the water, so every day we go by, we would see ourselves reflected in the glass. There we are. What a lovely crew. Look at us all huddling inside, scared of the wind. What a smart boat we are. All right, now that building and the two buildings behind it, brand spanking new, they sit on a wharf that somebody calls a pier. That's a pet peeve of mine. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But that was called Pier 4, and those three buildings replaced what was once known as the top grossing restaurant in the nation. It was owned by a guy named Anthony. It sat on Pier 4, and it was a restaurant. What was it called? Anthony's Pier 4 Restaurant. Anyone could do it. Now, Anthony, when he first opened his doors back in the 1960s, he offered all the cab drivers in Boston a free lunch, proving there is such a thing as a free lunch, but also proving really good marketing skills. Get into a cab, you ask for a restaurant recommendation, the responses are the same. Oh, you gotta go down to Anthony's Pier 4 Restaurant. Best seafood in Boston. And that, thankfully, is the extent of my horrific Boston accent. I am originally from New Haven, Connecticut. Where'd you go? Oh, you left already. See what happens when you're from New Haven? So that is why you can understand, actually, every single word I say. But there you are. Now we're out of the Innovation District into the Seaport District, and there's the South Boston Fish Pier. You'll see the fishing boats of the three rested up on either side. And these boats go out 150 miles out to Jeffrey's Ledge, George's Bank. Some of the most fertile fishing grounds in the world. They drag bird fish with these huge nets off the back of the boat, which is why they're called stern draggers. If you are keen with the obvious. They drag the nets through the water, they haul in their chests, the fish are brought back to the fish pier, and wave-packed ice and offloaded into those refrigerated trucks you see there and delivered fresh throughout New England, not as far as New York, nope. Or they're shipped across the Logan Airport and delivered fresh throughout the world. You could be as far away as India or Taiwan and still be eating fresh fish from Boston. Just ask your server, see if they know. Now that big white tent, a lot of people ask about this curiosity. This is a concert venue. There are 5,000 seats under that tent. Last summer it was known as the Leader Bank Pavilion. This summer it will invariably be known as some other bank pavilion. Still waiting to see which bank will pony up the naming rights, pony up enough money for the naming rights. But a great place to take in live music in the summer months, even chilly in the winter time. It was originally built as a temporary structure back in the 90s. People liked it so much they basically nailed it down. I'm sure more tools were used from that, but now it's a permanent structure here in the Seaport. Now coming up, you have these triangular vents. And if you are a triangular vent enthusiast, and you get them sometimes, you'll find more of those vents on the other side of the boat. We'll be going right by them a little bit later on. When we're directly in between the vents, like right now, we are directly above the Ted Williams Tunnel. And I don't want to see any people from Utah looking down through the water trying to see the cars going through the Ted Williams Tunnel. You are not Yankees fans. Those are the old people who fall for that. So let's stop and start looking. Now, we are still cruising along South Boston. And one of the things you'll notice along the shoreline of this entire tour is there's three things you're going to see. You're going to see wharves and piers. These are obviously man-made. And you're going to see a wide variety of rock retaining walls, such as the one we're looking at now. Now, why are these rock retaining walls important? Well, to build 75% of Boston, they deployed this technique called wharfing out. They built these huge wharves out into the harbor, and then they started building walls in between the wharves up towards the beginning, connecting them. They would push dirt into that space, displacing the water, creating land. They'd build another wall further down, they'd push in more dirt, creating more land, and this became known as the wharfing out of Boston. So all along this shoreline, you're going to see an enormous number, and a wide variety, in fact, of rock retaining walls. And every time you see a rock retaining wall, we are looking at man-made land. Now, South Boston over here on the right, or Southie, as you can see, entirely man-made. One of the things you'll notice besides the rock retaining wall is it's completely flat. Why would you build a hill? It's a lot of extra work. It's also a lot of extra dirt. Now, let's talk a little bit about where all this dirt came from, because when you think about it, we are talking an enormous amount of dirt to build 75% of Boston. So, the Shawmut Peninsula, as I mentioned, very rocky, very hilly. There were a bunch of hills. There was Fort Hill. Fort Hill back then was really, really big. Today, Fort Hill, it's really, really gone. They chopped it down, they leveled it off, they pushed it all into the harbor. South Station, the entire financial district of Boston, sits on the dirt that was once Fort Hill. Copp's Hill in the north end is about 20% shorter, and Beacon Hill, where the State House is today, that used to have 3 peaks on top of it. It was once known as Tri-Mountain. Today we only remember that in Tremont Street. Tremont, 3 hills, the extent of my French, there you go. So those 3 hills leveled off, pushed into the harbor, and then they took 60 feet off of the top of Beacon Hill itself. So you get a sense of how big that hill used to be. Well, they couldn't take the whole hill, because if they did, Boston would no longer be known as that shining beacon on a hill. So they put the State House up there to keep anyone from taking more dirt. Then they ran out of dirt, and they needed a whole lot more. So being resourceful, if not creative, they went southwest of Boston to the town of Needham. Now Needham had a whole bunch of hills, and apparently somebody said, take the hills, we don't need them, and all that dirt brought up to Boston. So there are 2 locations you'll find the dirt from Needham. There's a neighborhood called the Back Bay, because it once was the bay on the back of Boston, sticking to our theme of the obvious. From the Charles River all the way over to the Prudential Building, which I'm going to show you momentarily. That is all man-made land. The streets are laid out like a grid. It's completely flat. You can never get lost, because unlike New York, we use words, not numbers, for our streets, and then we alphabetize them because we like to show off. So we've got Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth, Essex, Fairfield, Gloucester, Hereford. Yeah, I'm showing off, clearly. I practice. So that is all Back Bay. And the rest of the dirt from Needham is actually on the other side of the harbor over there, and we'll be looking at that when we turn around. 2,400 acres of man-made land, and you can bet it is completely flat, because that is Logan Airport, and pilots don't like to land on hills, I'm told. So that is the rest of the dirt from Needham, and of course you'll see a rock retaining wall around the entire airport. Now, speaking of airports, planes often come in for a landing from the starboard side off there to the right, depending on which way the wind is blowing. Today they're coming in from the east, but they fly directly over those big cranes. Those are called gantry cranes, and that is the Conley Container Terminal, the most colorful, if perhaps not the most scenic part of our tour. But the reason those cranes are as short as they are is because the planes fly directly over them, and there's a very serious height restriction here in this part of South Boston. This is where the container ships come in on a regular basis. Boston's the largest port of entry in New England, and they come in here frequently. 90% of the goods coming into this country come in on container ships. Now, if you were able to see out the back, you'll get a lovely view of the skyline of Boston behind us, unless, of course, you're sitting with your back to the front, in which case it's in front of you, my New York friends. So here's the back of the boat back here where I am. I know it's really hard, I get it. I get it. I'm not going to pick on you for that. You get a pass. But no matter where we are on the tour, we always have a beautiful view of the skyline. So it's always worth taking a look at the buildings down there. We'll have an ever-changing view. But to the left of the tall buildings downtown, we're going to now get a view of 3.5 tall buildings, all of which sit over in the Back Bay. That really tall building in the middle, that is the Prudential Building, that was 1960. The one to the right, all glass panels, that's not only the tallest building in Boston, but the tallest building in New England. And I love to say this, that is the building formerly known as the Hancock Tower. You can see it just about anywhere in Boston. I say formerly known because the Hancock Tower, the naming rights dictated that Hancock had to occupy the building. Well, they moved out about 10 years ago. So the building has officially been renamed, wait for it, 200 Clarendon Street. That was the best they could come up with. Let's just call it the address. Well, funny story about the Hancock Tower. When it was under construction back in the 70s, on a windy day, sort of like the one we're having right now, the glass panels on the top 10 or 15 floors would literally pop off the side of the building and plummet to the sidewalk below. How cool is that? Unless you were a pedestrian. Nobody got hurt. That's the good news. They had to board up the building. It became known as the Plywood Tower. Very embarrassing for Hancock. They sued the window company, which of course we expected. But the lawsuit was quietly settled out of court when they realized that the window company was insured by Hancock. It is one of my all-time favorite true stories that I didn't have to make up. All right, we're coming out to the end of South Boston. How do I know this? There's Fort Independence. See that fort there? You see the cannons up on the wall? Those pesky British. Oh, sorry. We're still friends, right? You're on your best behavior. I'm watching because we don't want to have to kick you out of town again. But the last British troops were actually stationed out here on what was known and still called today Castle Island. There was a castle out here, and this was, in fact, an island off the coast of Boston. So from this fortification all the way back behind us to the tall buildings in downtown, man-made land. Absolutely extraordinary. This was an island off the coast of Boston. The last British troops were stationed out here during the siege of Boston, and from Long Wharf, where we departed from, that is where the last British troops were actually kicked out of Boston in shame, humiliation, and defeat. Let's get all that in there. And of course, that is still celebrated as a federal holiday. If you're a federal employee in Boston, that is known as Evacuation Day. That is a day off. If you're just a human being, that's also a day off because it is March 17th, which is St. Patrick's Day. So everyone gets a day off, which is why the 18th is also a holiday. Nobody goes to work the day after St. Patrick's Day. I probably don't need to elaborate why. So there we go. Now we're out in the outer harbor. We're going to turn in just a moment, but I'm going to draw your attention off to the right, off to the distance. See those beautiful hills? These are what we call the Great Blue Hills. We also call them the only hills remaining in the greater Boston area. They were just a little too far away to level and take all that dirt, or this harbor would be substantially smaller than it is, and Boston would still be much larger. We're going to start our turn here out in the harbor. There are 34 islands out here in Boston Harbor. Together they make up the Boston Harbor Islands National Park. You'll be relieved to know that I'm only going to talk in great detail about 33 of them. Yeah, I made that up. There are actually two things I want to point out to you as we turn, because I'm going to come back and talk about them in a minute, but I want you to see them as we turn. Off to the right, there's an island with two hills on it, and you'll see a rock retaining wall at the base of it. I want you to see that island, because I'm going to talk about it quite a bit, but as we continue turning, you're going to see another thing out here, these big, huge white tanks. See them out there in the distance? They sit on the end of Deer Island, the island that was once overrun with, no, not cows, good Lord, no, deer. So those big white tanks, I want you to see them, because they're going to be behind us when I talk about them. But those tanks and the island with the two hills, that's going to be right on our stern in a minute, these two things feature prominently in one of the greatest turnaround stories here in the city of Boston. This is a clean-up story of